Hello, my name is Mike Usrey. Welcome back to FM Live. I appreciate everybody showing up. And thank you for those of you that were early and waiting on me. I had a little bit of cleanup to do before we started. However, that being said, today we're going to talk about the shop toolbox. What is in the shop toolbox? What tools do you need to be able to work on a Miata? What things are necessary versus what things are nice to have and not always needed? We're going to get into all of this and more. And in the meantime, if you have any questions that you'd like us to cover during this video, be sure to drop those in the comments so that way we can answer them throughout the video as well. So let's go ahead and get started with, I'm going to make an assumption here. This is a video geared towards if you have gotten into Miatas recently, or maybe you've been into Miatas and you're just starting to want to work on it yourself. This is going to be more DIY themed because obviously we're going to talk about what tools you need to do the work on the cars yourself. And we're going to cover the most common tools that we use. This won't be an exhaustive list, but this is going to probably cover 80 to 90% of all the tools that are very commonly used for Miatas specifically, and a little bit of, other things that are just nice to have. So without further ado, let's start with a toolbox. So we have this nice bright green toolbox. As far as the box itself is concerned, this is very preferential. We like a big wide toolbox, something that has a flat top, and especially one that had a nice kind of rubberized mat. So that way there's a workspace, or you can keep some of the tools that you're currently using out and easy to access at all times. You can get boxes that are taller, you can get them that are, much bigger, much wider, or even smaller. It really depends on what fits you and your workspace best. But I do like and do recommend for most people that you get something that can be doubled as a workspace, because the more horizontal flat space that you have access to, the easier it is for you to lay out tools or new parts or things that you just need to take a look at and inspect before you reinstall it on the car. That being said, this is not a super fancy toolbox. The eagle-eyed among you probably know where this box was purchased from. It wasn't that expensive, but it serves the purpose quite well. I do like having a box that has rolly wheels. That's handy, especially if you have a bigger shop that you want to be able to move your box around and move it to different cars that you might have parked around, or whatever the case might be. Other than that, on the box itself, I do have some accoutrement. That's a towel holder, a little holder for the gloves, magnetic tray, a few things like that. So having a steel box versus an aluminum box or, some other non-ferrous metal box is actually a good thing, because you can use a lot of those magnet style holders for extra stuff on the side. Beyond that, the other maybe obvious thing that you've noticed is that we do have labels on all of these drawers. You don't have to do this. We like using labels because this box is actually shared amongst many of us here at Flyin Miata. So that way, if somebody who doesn't use the box very often is looking for a very specific tool, they don't have to open all 15 drawers to find the one thing that they're looking, because it's always in the last drawer that you check, right? So having a really basic Amazon special kind of label maker makes this really easy, and you can label your drawers. So let's go ahead and open the box and see what's inside it now and talk about the actual tools that we're using. Let's start with the top drawer, just because I like keeping the most common tools that I use in the top drawer. It's easier to access, easier to see, and it's going to be mostly sockets, wrenches, some bits, that kind of thing. So starting kind of on the left-hand side here, we do have some of the power tools. I have mostly 3/8 drive stuff because we're working on Miatas, not big diesel trucks. There are some other things, and we'll get into the other sizes in a little bit, but having a few nice, or at least handy electric tools is always a good way to go. Got some flashlights in the corner over here, but then most of the rest of this drawer is taken up with sockets. We've got lots of metric sockets, deep, shallow. We've got the impact style sockets. We have lots of chrome style sockets, tons of extensions, some adapters, and then even like the kind of neat swivelly impact style adapters here. So there's a lot of different things here, and with sockets, it's really easy to get carried away. Believe it or not, as many as we have in here, we could probably add more if we wanted to. But in short, I got the kind of sockets that are covering the range that we are mostly going to be using, which is generally going to be metric. At least stock, there's not any imperial size bolts on these cars at all. You know, generally we're going to go from 8 millimeters all the way up to about 21, maybe 24 millimeter sockets, depending on which variety we're looking at, just because, again, those are the most common size head bolts or nuts that are going to be on these cars. So most of these sets are going to be in that range. The other thing that I do like specifically for some of the tight spaces on these cars is I do have 1/4-inch drive stuff. Most of this is 3/8 drive, but having a 1/4-inch drive and a full socket set for 1/4-inch stuff makes it really handy for tight spaces. A lot of the stuff that's under the hood, you know, valve cover bolts, that kind of stuff, that they don't need a lot of torque, but it's easy to have something that's a little bit more maneuverable to get what you're doing in there and make it convenient for you. Beyond that, one of the things that I like having up here in this drawer is some of the special bits that are like Allen sizes. So we do have some imperial sizes as well as metric sizes, and our Torx bits. So beyond these guys, we can actually, I'll pull this out here. We do have this little tray. If you have some nerdy friends like I do, you can ask them to print you custom 3D printed trays to hold your different sockets. This makes it a little bit nicer for having everything exactly where it's supposed to be in the drawer. It doesn't run around. And then also the other good thing is that if, since multiple people are using this box, if you share your box, if somebody's run off with your T27 bit, you can just look at this and know, hey, could you bring that back here? I know you've got my T27. It's really easy to see if you've forgotten to put something away or somebody's borrowed it. So, other than that, up here, the other notable thing is that I do have a few different of these breaker bars. So I do have a 1/2-inch drive and a 3/8 drive breaker bar. These are very handy for all kinds of things. You can get away with just having one or the other, but it's really convenient to have one of each, especially if you're doing something where you need to hold the front of the engine and then spin something like the crankshaft or the flywheel on the back to loosen up bolts or whatever. This is really handy having two of them. Tons of extensions, and of course, can't forget our handy dandy jack adapter. That just lives up here because, again, I use this all the time, so having it in the top drawer just makes it easy. Besides that, I do have the E, or inverse Torx sockets, you could say. I have some Sharpies, I have a pen, and the flashlights in the corner. I have just a couple of those. Both of these are magnetic, but having a pen light and having a regular kind of floodlight style flashlight really makes it easy to see what you're doing if you don't have a bunch of other studio lights here to illuminate your workspace. Okay, so the reason why we have different sockets and why there's some that are shiny and some that are black, the black ones are called impact sockets, whereas the shiny ones are usually like a chromium vanadium socket. So it's just a difference in the material. They both could be the same size, you know, as far as what hex they have in them in the keyway. But the difference is that the chromium vanadium ones are often used with hand tools because you want this tool to not be moving around. You want it to be a nice positive fit with whatever fastener you're using with hand tools. So that way, one, you can feel what you're doing a little bit better, but also two, this chromium vanadium finish on whatever the base metal is, it's probably cast. It's very hard. So you can really give it a lot of torque and it's not going to bend or hurt this most of the time. It's at least very resistant to being beaten up and deformed. The impact sockets, on the other hand, they are usually like a chromoly base of some nature, but then they're black oxidized finish to kind of help you differentiate, you know, the socket types. But these guys are actually a softer metal. So they usually have a slightly looser fit on the fastener as well, even if like this is a 17 and this is a 17, same size. They often have a little bit looser of a fit, but they're a softer metal, so that way you can specifically use an impact gun or pneumatic gun of some nature that's really giving it kind of a hard hammering effect on that fastener. And it would be better that instead of like a chrome socket like this, instead of it breaking and shattering, because this would be, it's so hard, its tensile strength would actually cause it to kind of explode. Rather than that happening when you're using an impact, it would be better if it just kind of bent if it had to fail and deform rather than explode. So if you're using any kind of power tool, electric or pneumatic, impact sockets are the way to go. Chromies are for hand tools. That is my official recommendation. I know a lot of us live on the edge and like to live dangerously as far as mixing and matching, but that is the reason why there are two different kinds of sockets, because they basically are safe for one use. And you can still use the impact sockets with hand tools, of course, but because they do have a little bit looser fit, they're also a little bit thicker. If you're using hand tools with the chromies, you'll have a little bit better access. They're a little thinner, a little bit more precise. So, pros and cons. I guess I should call special attention because, you know, these are some of the specialty tools that we do offer as well. They're kind of wedged back in here, but there we go. We do have, of course, our MAR-free sockets for lug nuts. So they do feature this kind of it's kind of a smooth, hard plastic. I'm not sure what exactly plastic it is, unfortunately, but it's a nice, smooth plastic, and it does rotate separately from the rest of the socket itself. So if you're using this to get off your lug nuts, you can rest assured that this plastic is not going to scrape up your wheels. Very handy to have, besides all of the other tools in here, of course. All right. So, let's move on to the next drawer down. This one, sorry Travis, is going to make a lot of noise. The next drawer down, and my apologies to everybody watching as well, is going to be what you should be using, again, the next most often, because it's closer to the top, and also because it generally takes up a lot of space. Similar to the sockets are wrenches. So we do have a set of different wrenches here. Honestly, we could, again, have a lot more wrenches than this if we really wanted to. There we go. Sorry, this will pull out a little bit further. But we do have lots of metric, some that are also ratcheting style. And then we have our Imperial, we have some stubbies. And one thing that's very important, at least for Miatas, is to have a 10/12 flare nut wrench. This is very handy for brake lines, clutch lines, all of that kind of stuff. I also use it a lot of times for just M10 bolts and heads of nuts that are really rusty that I don't want to round off. Very, very useful tool. So, wrenches, they're pretty straightforward. Again, I usually keep these in sizes from 8 all the way up to 21, maybe 24, depending on what we need to do. These are not very fancy. Again, they're from the same place we got the TOOLBOX. They're relatively inexpensive, and that's kind of a trend that you're going to continue to see in this box, is because we wanted this box to be usable, but we didn't want it to cost a ton. And I'll come back to the cost a little bit towards the end here. But a lot of these tools are specifically designed to be inexpensive, but not cheap. The good thing about wrenches that don't have any moving parts is that there's not a lot to go wrong, so you don't have to spend a ton of money here. Besides that, in this drawer, I do have some extra long screwdrivers. These are the kind of screwdrivers that you probably don't need every day, but when you do need them, you're going to be really grateful that you have them. So a lot of times, I actually use the flat blade screwdriver often, not as a screwdriver, but more as a precision prying and driving device. But it's really handy when you've got something down along the side of the engine block that you need to like just kind of wiggle off a hose clamp or something like that, or there's a hose that's stuck down on the side of your intake that needs to be pried off. Having a long screwdriver like this makes that job much easier than trying to get in there and really, pry against it, but only have a little bit of room to move around. So another inexpensive tool set to have that makes a big difference when you need it. Besides that, just because this is mostly the wrench drawer, I do have some generic wrenches. Now, these are specifically for our end links, but if you get any of these because you do any kind of like a build-a cabinet, from your favorite Swedish furniture store, and you have some extra tools that are like flat wrenches like this or Allen keys, that kind of stuff, a lot of times I like to keep them all in one drawer. This is the only one we use for our purposes, but it's a good place to have them and know that it's in one of your specific drawers. Now, let's get on to torque wrenches, because I also have them live in here, and we did get some questions about these in the comments earlier. So let's pull these out. That'll make it a little easier to see what's going on. I'm going to start with the smaller one. We do have two torque wrenches, and the first one is a 3/8 drive and about, an 18-inch long, relatively small but easy to use. And it is a digital torque wrench. So I like having a smaller one for jobs that this will allow me to go down to, I think, 15 or so inch-pounds. This goes quite low for the torque rating. So if you needed to do something that's a really tiny fastener, having 3/8 drive for one and then also such a low torque rating, you can have this be very usable down for small stuff. It's also just an easy to pull out and, get it anywhere in the engine bay or underneath the car without having to really struggle with a big, long torque wrench. So more often than not, I actually go for this one quite often. Again, this is not a fancy Snap-on brand or Mac or anything like that. And in my opinion, at least, that's okay. This is not the torque wrench that I would probably use to put together an engine necessarily. But for pretty much anything else on the car, if you're doing any maintenance, regular, removing and installing new parts, suspension, clutches even, it's fine. This is going to be within the tolerance that you would need for 99% of stuff, as long as you're not building engines. And even then, you could get away with this if you really wanted to. If you like expensive stuff and you don't like building engines multiple times, if you can help it, spending a little bit of money there does make a bit more sense. But enough with that. This does the job for what we need it for, most of the general maintenance. The other one, for those that like a more tactile feel and a bit more old school, this isn't a beam style torque wrench, but it is a click style. So you spin the handle to set your torque, and then you lock it down, and then you have a 1/2-inch drive, and of course it's a big meaty guy. So this is great for lug nuts, suspension components, any of the big stuff, axle nuts, that kind of thing, because this will go up to 250 pound-feet. So any of the big stuff, we do have a larger torque wrench for that. And again, with the most of the big stuff on a Miata, this is not a fancy pants torque wrench, but if you're aiming for 200 pound-feet or something like that, if it's a little bit off, that's okay. So you don't have to spend a ton of money on your torque wrench for something like this that's mostly chassis and suspension related anyway. So I've covered 2 drawers so far. Do I need to stop and talk about anything in particular?
Maybe we haven't got there yet, but are there any tools worth having 2 of?
Oh, okay. So the question is, are there any tools worth having 2 of? And yes, I absolutely think there are. So torque wrenches being one of them, as you've seen. I think that having wrenches, some of the sizes of wrenches, is very handy to have multiples of. So like I might have, let me grab, of course, your 10 millimeter, and we also have a 10 millimeter over here, and then I also have a 10 millimeter over here. And I love having multiple wrenches in the same size for a lot of the common stuff, because some of the things that you might have to be working on, you might have fasteners that are right next to each other, or they're, a bolt and a nut that you need to tighten and keep one from spinning, whatever. So yeah, having sets of wrenches like this, or at least wrenches and sockets that are corresponding sizes, really helps out. There's a few more things in the box that we'll talk about that sometimes it's handy to have multiples of, but usually for sockets and wrenches, that's definitely where it makes a big difference. Okay, let's move on to drawer number 3. Let's go on this side. So this one, electrical and sharp things, because you're usually careful around your electrical stuff, so you should also be careful around sharp things. This one, move this stuff out a little bit so you can see what's going on in here. Let's start in the back. We do have some electrical components in here, so mostly like an OBD2 scanner. This is just a Amazon special that actually I'm quite pleased with. It didn't cost a lot of money. It has a lot of functionality in it. So if you're looking for an OBD2 scanner, having something that's just a simple little box like this will go a long way. You can also get them that are more like a Bluetooth dongle to your phone, so you can use an app, which are also pretty handy too. If you prefer that, I don't really have a problem either way, but having some kind of an OBD2 scanner is a great idea, as long as your car is newer than 1996, when they first started doing that here in North America. So besides that, we also do have a multimeter. So this guy, that I think it's worth spending a little bit of money at least. I wouldn't go down and buy the cheapest one off of your favorite bargain store online that rhymes with dish, but I would spend a little bit of money and get something that's at least usable and has decent longevity. A lot of times the really cheap and nasty ones, they only cost like $5–10, and they can work okay, but they're not going to be as accurate. And usually they're just not going to live as long. I find that those ones die after a year or so, and it's not worth it. You're kind of throwing money away. So spend a little bit of money. It doesn't have to be a Fluke, but something that's a nice, reliable, and well-reputed kind of brand will do you just fine. We usually use this mostly for testing voltage, for testing if there's any kind of ground issue, continuity test, that kind of stuff. So it only really needs basic functions. If you want to be a little bit extra fancy, you can get one that has an amp clamp. And I don't think ours does. We probably should have one, but it's not something that we normally have to be working on here with any of our shop cars. But if you're doing testing on your alternator, or to see if you have like a magical power draw when the car is turned off, having an amp clamp that will attach to your multimeter here is a good option to have. So consider that when you're shopping for multimeters. Besides that, some of the other wiring things that we have, I have some wire strippers. I think that these kind of automated gun ones are just super easy and convenient. If you're old school or just prefer the, really precise control, you can get those that are kind of a clamp on and they strip off. Actually, I do have some of those here too, that you can grab your wire and then strip it manually. So either is fine, but having some kind of wire strippers that are quick and convenient is always a great thing. And then having a good pair of butt crimpers or wire crimpers. They do butt connectors, they do ends, terminals, all kinds of stuff. This may look strange to some of you, and that's because this is kind of a take on a professional's tool. I wouldn't call this a professional brand necessarily, but it is a pretty decent backyard mechanic brand tool. But these guys are ratcheting. You can probably hear it. There we go. And one that helps so that way you're not applying too much pressure. They are more or less calibrated. Am I flipped up? Sorry. There we go. So they're more or less calibrated as far as how far you can squish, and they have a good grip, and they don't cost a whole bunch when you buy them, at least for this particular brand. So good set of crimpers. Don't cheap out and get the ones that are just stamped steel. They will work, but they suck. I recommend you stay away unless you don't have any other option. Besides that, I've got some test leads. So if you need the test to see if something's got 12-volt power, clamp it on the battery and then do a quick test, for a solenoid or something like that. We have some wire leads. We do have, as far as sharp stuff is concerned, actually here, before I move on to that, This is another tool that is probably underrated in most toolboxes, and it is a pick set for specifically wire connectors. So these are little, all kinds of different shapes and sizes, but you use these to release pins from the back of connectors or sometimes from the front of different electrical connectors. So if you need to repin your connectors or see if it's damaged or just remove a plastic piece that's broken, whatever, you may need to have a set of these guys so that way you can depin your connector and repair it and replace it with whatever you need from there. Super cheap. On these guys, yeah, you can spend money, but the cheap stuff does work fine on these guys. So get some, you can get them in some ungodly numbers of like, hundreds of these guys, but really, if you've got a selection of 30, 40 of them, you're probably fine. Sharp stuff. So we do have scrapers, getting gaskets and stuff like that off of oil pans or blocks or whatever. So scrapers with some different kinds of blades. We do have a decent set of shears and, just heavy-duty scissors, more or less, on these guys. I use these all the time. These are some flush-cut nips, or side cutters, you might say. But I use these for trimming off the tails of zip ties all the time. Super handy to have. That way your zip tie isn't cutting you whenever you're reaching around in the engine bay. And, of course, we've got a few box knives. Very handy to have for all kinds of things. So, kind of touched on it, but I do keep our zip ties in here in the corner just because it's with all the other stuff as well. But that's it for this drawer. Okay, let's move on to the left side here. So this is another very important drawer. This is all of the measurement tools that we have. So this guy, I have kind of a little bit of everything for different kinds of measuring stuff, but just some of the obvious stuff we have here is, of course, a tire pressure gauge. I do have actually a secondary one for, it's a bike shock pump and gauge. So if you need to check small capacity things, such as the Fox shocks, this is actually a good way to do it. We do have a tape measure. Usually 25 feet tape measure is about as much as you need. If you're doing more car stuff, you can get longer ones, but I don't think I've ever used anything bigger than a 25 foot. I do have some smaller rulers along with a regular full-size ruler. These guys are super handy when you just need to have a reference. Also, having just a few metal straight-edged objects comes in handy when you're checking to see if things are flush or flat and that kind of stuff. Just eyeballing. Let's see, beyond that, I do have in the back here a few different angle gauges. Now, if you're not doing much fabricating, you probably don't need these. But if you're doing any kind of fabrication, or actually in some cases, if you need to check like driveline angles for your drive shaft, that kind of stuff, having at least an angle gauge that's a good eyeball kind of measurement way to do it is handy. I use this one, especially since it's easy and tiny, a lot more often than you might think. If you need to get more precise with that, I do like also having a digital angle gauge. So this guy, it's magnetic. It's got magnets on 3 sides. You can stick it onto anything that's, steel, of course, or at least ferrous, and that way you can see what your angle is. This is a much more precise tool, of course. It's great for if you're doing fabrication for drive shafts and mounting differentials and stuff, but we actually use this mostly for when we're using our hub stands to set up the alignment on our cars after we do a new suspension kit. So relatively inexpensive. We do sell these as well, so we can put a link down in the comments about where you can get this. Very handy to have if you do suspension work yourself and have one of our hub stand kits, or even if you're doing just DIY home alignments and kind of, guessing until you can get to the alignment shop too. Very handy, inexpensive little tools. Besides that, this is one that you don't use terribly often, but having a feeler gauge set is a very handy tool if you do your own maintenance, especially if you have an NB and you need to check your lash for your valve shims. For Miatas, there's not a whole bunch of other things that you'd need this for. You know, if you're setting your sensor depth or distance, I guess, from like if you have an NA or NB where the trigger wheel needs to be set, or even NCs where the trigger wheel is actually, you can have a finite distance of 65 thousandths. I forget what it is off the top of my head, but anyway, having a set of feeler gauges like this will be handy so that way you don't have to guess. A lot of times I don't use this very often, but these are also quite inexpensive, so checking one in your box is a pretty good call. Other than that, as far as measuring tools, this is also one I use a ton, and it's a caliper set. So again, we're not talking about huge amounts of dollars for this tool, but knowing that I can get reasonably accurate results if I need to check something or see that if I need to drill a hole to a certain size, I need to check my drill bit to see for sure what size if I'm comparing metric versus a fractional imperial measurement, whatever. This is an easy way to do it. Inexpensive tool, and I use it a ton. I highly recommend that if you don't have a caliper set, add it to your toolbox. Okay, back here in the back corner, just because this is a nice comfy place for them to live, I do have a telescoping magnet. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but I do like having a telescoping magnet for when you, oh crap, drop your bolt down in the engine bay and then it doesn't go pink, pink, pink on the floor, so you have to go fishing with a magnet. It's worth your time. And then of course, having a little telescoping mirror. This is great for setting ignition timing on NAs and NBs so you can see the timing marks on your timing cover plate, you know, stuff like that. It's handy for all kinds of other things. Even the, crap, I lost my bolt down in the engine bay. Where'd it go? You can use this to see where it is sometimes. So inexpensive, handy tools that when you have them, you're glad you do. When you don't, you're like, I wish I just spent an extra couple bucks to grab those. Okay, let's move back over to this side and let's talk about, this is definitely one of my favorite drawers. Let's talk about hammers, chisels, files, and pry bars. So this is a drawer that I usually use when I'm tired of fighting something or ready to just get out a little bit of aggression. So I love having a selection of different mallets and hammers. These guys, especially the ones that kind of have these kind of rubbery plastic kind of grips, are nice because they're not going to splinter like a wooden handle. Nothing against wooden handles. I do like a nice, you know, high quality hammer or what have you, but if you're banging on your car, especially metal stuff, and you accidentally bonk something under the car, this really isn't going to damage anything if you hit the handle. It's also a little bit more forgiving on your hands, and again, it's not going to splinter if you totally goof up and just wail on something. It's not going to break apart like a wooden handle. These are also surprisingly inexpensive compared to most wooden handle hammers and mallets, so a great option there. I do like having a few that are in brass specifically, just because this is going to be a softer metal. Now, if you need to kind of wail on something but the mallet isn't really doing it, you can give it a little bit more beans and transfer a bit more energy without beating up a bolt head or something like that accidentally, because this will take some of the damage instead of the hardware that you're working on. Speaking of getting belligerent, I like a good selection of some pry bars. So these guys, they really, my approach to pry bars is always start with the biggest one, and if it doesn't fit, then go to the smaller one. So I don't use the smaller ones that much. As long as I have room, I'm always going to reach for the larger size pry bars generally. So having a good pry bar that's handy and beefy enough to be able to handle most things, like bracing the hubs whenever you're tightening down the hub nuts and stuff like that, or wrenching on a transmission to get it out, you know, whatever you need to do. Pry bars are super, super handy. Strongly recommend having a decent set, or at least having some that you can replace easily if you're really mean with them. Underneath these guys, and just because I don't use them that often, I do have a set of different punches and chisels and things like that. These guys, they will get beat up quite a bit. Just ask our friend Ethan, but they are something that I consider to be more or less consumables. They take a lot of abuse if you do use them, such as staking axle nuts, that kind of thing. But having a good selection of chisels versus a pointed punch or something like that can go a long way if you're really trying to move something, or if you just have a stubborn nut that you can't break off and it's in a weird place. Sometimes you can tap the corner and get it to loosen. All kinds of uses. Another very inexpensive thing for most of the chisel sets, unless you're really shopping towards the top of the premium lineup. Over here on this side, we do have, actually before we move on, I forgot, this is kind of hidden. This is a diamond in the rough. If you don't know what this is a spring-loaded punch, a center punch. So if you need to drill a hole and you don't want your drill bit walking around, you can use this guy, and I won't use my hand because it'll hurt, but it actually has a spring-loaded center section, and when you press it down, it'll kind of go ka-chunk, and it'll really make a nice little divot without having to use a hammer. You can just press it with your hands. Very handy. Now moving on to these guys, I do have some files. These are something that I use a lot of the times just because I'm a bit more finagly than some of the other guys, I suppose. I like to make sure all of my edges are rounded and that they're not sharp. So I usually take a little bit extra time and find a file that suits the purpose, you know, fits the space, and get it nice cleaned up if I have to drill a hole or cut off a tab or something like that. So having some that are a few round sizes, maybe a triangle like this, rat tail file, just having a selection is nice to be able to use it for whatever suits what you're working on. Another thing that I will stress is if you're going to do files, get a couple of small ones, because these guys come in really clutch when you have a tight space, but you want to clean up a metal edge or something like that. Very handy. And lastly in this drawer, this is another kind of forgotten tool, I think, amongst a lot of people, that when I discovered what it was and started using it, I am a complete believer. This is called an impact driver. Oops, sorry. There we go. Impact driver. And this guy has this attachment where you can put in different size or different style bits. So just like a screwdriver, or whatever you want to put in there basically. But then you can use your hammer, your mallet, whatever, and smack this guy. And one, it's going to drive this tool down into the fastener and make sure it's really secure, but it has a ratcheting mechanism inside it, and so it'll give it a little bit of turn at the same time. So if you've got some really rusty, crusty, and difficult to remove bolts or screws, this tool is a lifesaver. This has kept me from screwing up bolts and screws of all kinds of stuff, usually like brakes and things like that they heat cycle and get really hot and rusty. But it'll save me from tearing up that hardware because I'm able to put some force into them and not strip them using just a wrench or just a socket or something like that. So a very simple tool that I recommend everybody at least consider if you're going to be working on your own car, because this will save you a lot of headache from fixing a mistake of stripping out the head of a screw or a bolt or something. And they're not expensive. They're relatively easy to get, and you can get them online. You can get them at a lot of different hardware stores. So, okay, let's come back over here to this other side. So this is kind of a bonus drawer for me anyway. This is where we keep a lot of our brushes and specialty plier kind of tools, and also in this case, just because it's here, we do have a roller. This one we use a lot of times whenever we're installing like some sound deadening material or something like that. You can use it for a lot of different other things if you just need to use something to apply some force and roll it around. Brushes, those are pretty self-explanatory. You can see that these smaller ones are used a little bit more than the larger ones, but gosh, these are so gosh darn cheap that if you tear these guys up in a month and have to go buy a replacement set, who cares? So having a good set of brushes to be able to clean stuff off is a good thing. These guys back here, just to kind of cover what each one of these are. This one, if you don't know what this is another really super awesome tool that a lot of people should have in their toolbox. and it is a tool to remove hangers, those rubber exhaust hangers. So you can put this up against your hanger and this will push out the metal portion and pry the rubber hanger or poly hanger straight off. And it's just a squeeze function. So you're not up there prying and trying to grip it with, you know, vice grips and stuff like that. This tool will save you a lot of aggravation. Strongly recommend. Again, I think I got this one on that online. Oh, I don't know if I want to name names. It came from Amazon. That's fine. Everybody knows Amazon. So great tool. You can get them a lot of different places. Same thing with the rest of these guys. So the rest of these ones are actually all related to hose clamps. So just to talk about them one by one here. This one, I love this one. So this guy is a remote or cable driven, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's for hose clamps that what you can do is use this end down here to grab onto your hose clamp and it'll actually ratchet shut. Let me do that again. There we go. So I can actually squeeze this guy and it'll ratchet shut. And if you have a hose clamp in there, now you don't have to hold it or like try to fuss with it with pliers, but you can move this around and it's super flexible. So if you have something down in your engine bay that's really difficult to get to, this will save you a lot of frustration getting that taken care of. Another really, really good tool to have. These other guys, these are all different kinds of either like hose pry tools. This will help you force a hose off of a radiator or something like that. This one is a very specific kind of clamp tool for hose clamps. And this guy, I actually haven't even used this one yet, but it came in a set with these guys, so we threw it in there to keep it in the box. If you have the right style hose clamp, those can be very handy though. And then same thing with this one. This one has some kind of spinning attachments for another specific kind of clamp that, again, I haven't used this one yet myself, but if you do come across that on maybe a different car or bike or something like that, having the right one will make your life easier. We do have a question. Let's stop here. What is the question? Back to the top drawer. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the question was, what brand of impact are we using? So as with a lot of stuff in this box, they all came, or most of them came from the same box store. These actually for us are kind of a venture into this particular brand. I've not used Hercules before, but so far I've been pretty impressed for the value that you can get out of these guys. The great thing about them is that they basically have two different battery sizes, a smaller one and then a larger size footprint. And these two battery sizes will fit pretty much all of their tool range, you know, whether it be wrenches and ratcheting stuff for cars, or if you have any woodworking tools, you know, saws, that kind of stuff. A lot of them use these two batteries, and as long as you have a couple of each, you can pretty much power a whole garage worth of electric tools. So I don't think that they're super high quality. Again, that's not really what this toolbox is about, but bang for buck, I'm quite happy with them. I think that having a ratcheting wrench like this and then having an impact that's just a 3/8 drive impact has been really, really useful. This guy, especially with this 5 amp hour battery version, this will break loose lug nuts, no problem. I haven't tried it on a hub nut just yet. I'd really like to see if it's tough enough to do that. On paper, it says that it's tough enough to do that. But so far, you know, for the dollar you're spending, if you're just getting into this and you want to not break the bank, I've been pretty happy with them. All right. Anything else on this top drawer?
Yeah.
Oh, next one.
I'm going to try that question again. What brand impact driver do we use?
Oh, what brand impact driver? I'm sorry. I misheard the question. Sorry. So there's your bonus fact for the electric tools. The impact driver, it's a Pittsburgh. So same big box store that we got a lot of this stuff from. Again, with fewer moving parts, I'm pretty comfortable with using that brand. The good thing about it is even with this that does have some ratcheting moving parts, it's got a lifetime warranty. So as long as you have one that's within driving distance of you, it's a pretty big no-brainer to me if you're backyard mechanic or looking to do some hobby stuff. It really is a pretty decent way to go about it, because if you break it, you just take it back down and go get it replaced. Okay, sorry, my apologies. Anything else before we move on? Cool. All right, so let's move back over here to the next one down. This one is kind of a little bit of everything as far as we're mixing things up a little bit, but I like having these deeper drawers because you can use some of these taller organizers. So at the moment I have kind of a wire organizer that has a lot of our wrenches and pliers over here on this side, and then I do have kind of a selection of screwdrivers over there, and then a few hose picks and trim tools and stuff like that that are mixed in. This drawer honestly could use a little bit more organization, and this is always kind of a continual project for me, getting things organized and having some little trays or whatever built so that way we can keep things in a better, more organized fashion. But just to kind of cover what we do have in here, this is a screwdriver set. You can get individual screwdrivers, but a lot of times if you're looking to maximize your dollar, buying them in a set like this is the way to go, because this was not a lot of money for a lot of different variations. And you can see they're all labeled on the top, so it's easy to know which one you're after. They do also have some of these little bitty guys. I don't use these all that much, but there are some small fasteners on the Miata that sometimes these come in handy for. Having some Allens, again, a pretty, I guess, run-of-the-mill Allen set for metric and imperial. These are standard. You can get these super cheap anywhere. Some nut drivers. These guys are very handy, and they do have the nut driver tool here that also just accepts any kind of standard 1/4-inch hexagonal bit. So very handy, good bang for buck in these kinds of kits when they have a big selection like that. Screwdrivers are relatively straightforward, so as long as it feels comfortable to you in your hands when you're just holding the tool, it'll probably work really well for you. I know some people, I will mention, like the screwdrivers that have a solid cap or end, so that way if you needed to, you can use a mallet or hammer and wheel on them. I will sometimes do that with these. Just kind of bear in mind that it is plastic. You can't go too hard before you really start messing them up. So if that is a big thing for you, maybe go spend a little bit more on your screwdrivers to get one that's got a metal cap on it. I don't usually have to do that, and especially with that impact driver, I usually don't worry about that for my screwdriver set. Moving over here to this arrangement with all of the different kinds of pliers. So I do have several different needle nose over here. Basically just these two guys, or actually these three guys, are my needle nose pliers that I use the most of. So I have this like spark plug boot style one. It's also great for grabbing hoses if you need to wiggle them off. A couple like mostly straight, and then a 45-degree angle needle nose. Those are super handy. I use them all the time. Just a regular set of kind of 2-position gripping pliers. Very inexpensive, but again, use these all the time. They're handy for lots of things. These guys, once you get a nice, or at least mostly nice, pair of hose clippers like this, and you actually can get some nice flush cut ends on your hoses when you're, trimming your fuel line or trimming your coolant hoses or something like that. This is a really nice tool to have, just to kind of make it feel like you're not using a rabid beaver to try to chop your hose to the right length. Really inexpensive tool. I like it quite a bit. Having a decent set of vice grips, or insert your favorite brand of that style tool here, is a good thing. I like the ones that have this grip on it. Some people don't. I like it because I can really give it a good squeeze and not feel like I'm cutting off all the circulation of my fingers. So this is a good set. Have a big one, have some long skinny ones for vice grip kind of stuff. Having a selection of that is very handy for a lot of things. Another tool that I use more often than I would think, out of normal selection of tools, is a set of side cutters that are like heavy duty side cutters. So these guys I actually use more for like grabbing onto wires and giving them a twist to pull them out, or if I have, like if I'm working on a seat to do a foamectomy and I need to pull out those hog rings, I can grab onto those guys and give them a good twist. And these guys are sturdy, and because they're hardened teeth, they don't get all banged up as if you were using, I actually don't have one of the other cheaper ones. Well, I guess if you were using something a bit more, you know, small and delicate like this, these guys will take abuse, and you can use them for all kinds of things besides cutting wires and stuff like that, which they also do just fine. Lastly, over here, I do have just a large adjustable pipe wrench kind of guy. This one, you can get these everywhere in all kinds of different flavors and brands. I don't have a huge preference other than that I do like them to have some nice large serrated teeth, and I do like it when they have kind of a diamond shape to the jaw as well. That way, if you're using these to grab onto a nut or a bolt, they do have a really positive engagement on the corners. So great tool, handy to use for all kinds of things. I do have, because it wasn't included in this particular screwdriver set, I do have a Phillips number 3 screwdriver. This is especially important for like NAs and NBs. You do have some Phillips number 3 fasteners, like the Frankenstein bolts and whatnot. So if you try to use the smaller, more sharp pointed bits, you'll usually strip them out. So make sure you get a number 3 if you have one of the earlier cars. I'm seeing we've got a question. What do we got?
Staying on the topic of screwdrivers.
Screwdrivers.
I think JIS screwdrivers are really worth it.
Oh, good question. Thank you for asking. Are JIS screwdrivers worth it? I would say yes, but I'd be a little bit of a hypocrite because none of ours are JIS screwdrivers. So, should you use a JIS screwdriver? I actually really like them. I don't have a good answer for why we don't have them in our box. So do as I say, not as I do. But yes, JIS screwdrivers, if you are using them, especially like in a Phillips number, well, I guess they're actually different designation, but you know, equivalent to a number 2 and maybe even a number 3, I would recommend that if you're going to spend some money on screwdrivers, yeah, those make a good amount of difference. And you know, again, with getting just the right size, but having the actual profile here be correct makes a big difference on whether you can have a really good positive engagement with that fastener, or if you're more likely to strip it out because it's not quite fitting the fastener as perfectly as it could. So, yes, short answer, do it. I like them. They do cost more. So, you know, if you're looking to just build your box at first, if you need some generic ones, that's fine. Do that. At least you'll have something. But if you're looking to keep your toolbox for a while, having at least a couple of JIS screwdrivers is a good idea. Did I cover that one okay? Okay, we'll move on then. Besides that, down here, just a few little random things that I have. I do have a set of pliers. Or, I'm sorry, excuse me, tweezers. These wouldn't work very well as pliers, but these are just cheapy tweezers, and I use these oftentimes for if I drop a small screw down under the carpet or behind a plastic fastener and I need to reach down there without taking it apart. If there is maybe a little like delicate piece of rubber, like an O-ring or something like that, that I need to be able to grab and pull out and replace, but I don't want to take everything apart. You can find a ton of uses for tweezers, and they're super cheap. You probably have a few laying around in one of your drawers at your house, so stick one of them in your toolbox. You will use it more often than you think. Speaking of other tools that you'll use more often than you think, a trim removal tool. This is absolutely something you should have in your toolbox. I use this all the time for plastic fasteners, as well as some of the other bits and bobs, like if you're needing to work on rubber hoses or something like that and you need a little bit extra grip, you know, prying that hose off of the barb, this also does a great job. On those same lines, though, there are tools exactly for that, and they are called hose pick tools. So these guys, they are just kind of bulky picks of different shapes with some kind of weird squiggles to them, and that just gives you a little bit of room and leverage so you can get these underneath the hoses, kind of work the tool around and break the hose loose. Oftentimes, if it's a car that's not had a lot of maintenance, those hoses kind of get glued onto those radiator nipples and stuff like that. So being able to break the hose loose from whatever it's attached to without cutting it or damaging things these are super handy. I also use these for other things too. So again, a lot of these tools, as long as you know what you're doing, you can use them for kind of multiple purposes, but I will stick with the hose removal tool on these guys. Lastly in this box, but not least, I have a very inexpensive set of plastic trim removal tools, just like that metal one, except for these guys are non-marring. They won't hurt most surfaces that are softer. They also, especially this big one, if you need to kind of scrape stuff off like window stickers and things like that, this works awesome for that kind of stuff. They're super cheap. If you get them all scraped up, bent up, you go buy another set for a few dollars, you're good to go. But keep these in your box. They are a great addition. Yeah, so that's it on that drawer. Let's move on to the next one. This one is another, admittedly, kind of catch-all for our purposes because we don't use them that often. But we do have kind of our more electric tool drawer here that, you know, sometimes we'll need a drill so that way we can drill a hole somewhere if we're mounting an extra bit, an aftermarket piece. So we do have one of those. The thing that I would recommend on these guys, again, you know, this fits in with our impact that we were using, same style battery. So having tools that do match and are able to share batteries makes it easier for you. You don't have to have multiple ecosystems just to use the tools. But the other thing is that especially like NA and NB owners, if you're using a drill, so that way you can install our turbo kit or a turbo kit and you're drilling a return in your oil pan, oftentimes you'll need one that's got a large enough chuck. So this guy has a 1/2 inch chuck on it. Sometimes they're only like 3/8 chucks, but having a 1/2 inch chuck just means that the jaw opens up further and you can use those larger drill bits. So it's a good idea to get a larger chuck if you can. Beyond that, this is a, not a hair dryer, stop it. This is a heat gun. I love having a portable heat gun like this that doesn't have a cord attached, again, because it just uses the same batteries. But this guy I can use, especially when I'm doing anything with heat shrink with as an attachment. I can use and put my wire or whatever right here and just give it a quick blast. And then that's it, I'm done. And I can go on with my day. Really easy, convenient. Even if you don't have a wireless one, some kind of a heat gun is a great tool to have, especially when you start getting into needing to use butt connectors and crimping wire that has heat shrink on it. We do have some other little rotary style brushes down in here. Don't use these a whole bunch. They're really cheap though. You can chuck them up into your drill if you need to, just do a quick job getting some rust off of a surface, something like that. And lastly, in this drawer, we have a timing light. So these guys, you can spend a ton of money on timing lights. You can spend not a lot of money on timing lights. They all kind of work about the same. Oftentimes the features that they have may be like advancing or retarding the ignition timing as far as how it's displaying the flash. But having some kind of a timing light, you don't have to spend a ton of money to do it. As long as it is something that has adjustable timing, that's really all you need for Miatas. They don't need anything terribly fancy. But very invaluable. NA, NB Miata owners definitely should have one of those, or at least access to one of those if they're doing timing belt jobs, that kind of stuff. Okay, let's do this drawer next. So this one is mostly air tools with a few other bits and bobs thrown in. Again, I haven't quite organized this drawer, my apologies, but we don't use this one very often. So we do have a large pneumatic air gun here with a 1/2 inch drive. So if we've got axle nuts or something that's really, really stubborn, we can bust this guy out and just whip them off, no big deal. These guys, if you don't have brand loyalty, you can find these for pennies on the dollar at your local garage sales, yard sales like that. You know, people are constantly selling off their tools like this because they moved on to more expensive brands and done that kind of stuff. A basic one will often do it as long as it actually works. You don't need anything terribly fancy because a lot of the hardware on Miatas is not that big. So if you need an air tool, they are great to have when you need them. If you got something really rusty crusty. So something basic will often do the trick. Besides that, I do have, this is an air chuck. It actually does have a gauge on it, but the gauge is not good. But I still like it because it is a still functional air chuck. So filling up tires, that kind of stuff works great, and it uses the same attachment as this one for our air hoses here at the shop. We also have an air blaster, or at least that's what I call it. It's just a little air gun, air nozzle. So that way if you need to blow off all the dust and debris and that kind of stuff you've been rolling around on the ground, blow off the car because you've been making a mess, drilling holes, whatever. Having a little air nozzle, another good thing to have in your box. And this guy, oh, we do actually have two of these guys. Both of these are used. We didn't pay anything for them because I was able to find a deal with one of our guys that upgraded. So yeah, it does have brand name on it, but these are just used tools. Again, you can get these cheap if you just keep an eye on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, that kind of stuff. But this one is a 3/8 drive rather than 1/2 inch. So you have a little bit more selection. We've got the impact sockets for both 1/2 inch and for the 3/8. So might as well use them if you've got them. It's good to have backups just in case. I guess you could kind of call these duplicates, that we do have the electric tools and hand tools and pneumatic, so we do have duplicates for this use. Besides that, in here, this funny looking guy, another tool that many of you may not recognize, but I strongly recommend that if you do enough brake jobs, you pick one of these up. So this is a brake pad spreader. And you can see that as I actuate it, it's moving these two paddles further apart from each other. So if you're doing a brake job and you need to recess your pistons so that way you can install the new pads, you can use this to spread them apart rather than using a screwdriver and kind of prying on your pistons or prying on your pads to get them to reset back into the calipers. Very easy. It's kind of like if you ever use those like caulking gun tools, it's the same kind of process, only it's just heavier duty stuff with big paddles, and they just spread apart. Very handy. Not terribly expensive. I think that was $35, $40-ish. So if you do enough brake jobs, you'll appreciate that. Speaking of brake jobs and other suspension related stuff, chassis stuff, another thing to have, if not in your box, at least around the shop, is some bungees. So these guys, I like the ones that are actually quite long like this. They have a lot of different attachment points that if you wanted to, you could put the hooks through here. But you can use these guys to hang up your brake calipers if you're doing a brake job, so that way they're not just dangling by the brake hose. Anything that you need to kind of keep from just dangling or dropped on the ground, you can use these guys to keep them in place. They're very cheap, very easy. You can put them in your box or again, hang them on the wall, whatever. I do have a few smaller ones as well. Sometimes I'll use the little guys, but I use the big ones all the time. Okay, so that's it for that drawer. Let me throw these guys back in here. And the last drawer. So this one is kind of our stuff that we don't use very often. I usually just keep it in the case still. Case in point, we have a tap and die set here. We don't use this very often, but it's nice to have a tap and die set when you need it. So basic sizes here. Again, this one will cover usually a wider gamut than you need or want. You can spend a ton of money on taps and dies, and there's a pretty wide range of quality as well. So do your research. Actually, with a lot of this stuff, if you're not sure, if you want to make sure you're getting a good value, but you're not paying too much, there's a cool YouTube channel called Project Farm that tests a lot of tools like this, and I know he has one for taps and dies. So if you need to find out what brand you want to use, go check out his channel. He's got one for this and a few other things. But we've got multiple sizes, taps, dies, some thread combs as well, so that way if we need to tell what size fastener we're working on, just a decent selection. It's not exhaustive. Oftentimes with tap and die sets, you'll end up having to order individual stuff because, oh, I need an MPT tap, or oh, I need an M10 by 1, or oh, I need a left-hand tap, you know, so occasionally you'll end up buying onesies, twosies, but the good news is that they're easily accessible online and at most hardware stores if you need a specific size. So you will likely be constantly adding to that all the time. Actually, here, we'll do this one next. This guy, I would say this is a nice to have, not a need to have. Depends on what kind of work you plan on doing, but having a threaded press like this, where you might use it to install and remove bushings for your control arms, if you need to do ball joints, if you need to do, if you're clever, you could probably use this to pull your steering wheel. Maybe not the greatest tool for that. There's quite a few different things that you could do with a set like this, but it is something that, you know, if you're not really doing a lot of in-depth suspension work, that kind of stuff, you may not be using this set. We obviously do that kind of stuff, so when we need to do service on our cars, our shop cars, we like to have access to it. Same brand as a lot of this other stuff, so not terribly expensive, just bulky and heavy. We have a question. Yes? Oh, yeah, that's a great thing. Oh, good. Thank you so much. So the comment was about if you don't want to buy this, there's a lot of loaner programs at local auto parts stores. So most of the big name auto parts stores, they will loan you tools. Usually you go up to the counter, say, I need a ball joint tool, I need a spring compressor, I need a whatever, and they will loan you the tool. Basically, you pay for it up front, you go use the tool, you bring it back. As long as you didn't break it, they'll just refund you. No big deal, easy peasy. So yeah, if you don't do this kind of work all the time, but maybe your car really needs ball joints, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do it this time just to get it over with. Yeah, go rent the tool, use it, take it back. That way you don't have to store it in your toolbox. That way you're not out the money. It's really easy. There's a lot of tools that you can do this way. So like scan tools, you can usually do that way. A spring compressor, yeah. Oh, steering wheel pullers or like pulley pullers. You can do a lot of those kinds of tools that way. So that is a great suggestion. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so a lot of these other boxes in here are actually empty otherwise. I think this one's got stuff in it. Yeah, so this is another one of those tools that if you don't use a lot of time to do ball joints or other pullers, this is another set that if you go down to an auto parts store, you'll likely see something very similar for rent as well. We use this often enough, you know, especially like for ball joints and tie rod ends, that we just have one of ours in our toolbox. So that is pretty much it for the toolbox itself. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is not an exhaustive list of all the tools that you could or should have for your use case. This covers what we consider for most general maintenance and even, you know, a lot of upgrades to be 80–90% good for a lot of what we do on Miatas. We do have, besides this, we do have other tools elsewhere, like we have a wall-mounted spring compressor. We have some other big pulley puller sets. We do have a actually quite large tap and die set, you know, so we have other stuff that if we need to do specialty things, a big hydraulic press, actually that's another good one. But you know, those are tools that you don't have to have in your home garage or your, you know, if you got a hobby shop type of thing. They're nice to have, and if you do enough things that require those, you might consider doing more than this. But this is a good showcase of what, if you wanted to get into wrenching a little bit more than just casually, you might consider doing tools like this. So now that we kind of talked about all this stuff, what does it cost? You know, it isn't terribly expensive, but it isn't cheap either, right? So when we did this, we actually intentionally did this to, one, have a toolbox that all of our shop guys can use. This isn't the box that our previous full-time mechanics and engineers use. They actually have their own personal box. But any of the customer support team, this is what we use when we're working on shop cars or builds and stuff like that. So we wanted to have a box that kind of did a little bit of everything. So this box, all of the tools that were mostly sourced through online retailers like Amazon or Harbor Freight for a lot of it, this box and all of the tools in it was about $3,500. Do you have to spend that much to do all of this? No. Do you need all of the tools in here? No, probably not. But if you wanted to have something like this that kind of covers the majority of it, and we're not a small, two-car garage that we're working on our shop cars, and sometimes it could be suspension, sometimes it could be turbos. This does a lot of it. So if you're looking to do something starting from relatively little or just adding to your box, you could spend a lot more than what we have to do this with different brands, different sources for boxes and tools, but you also don't have to. You could probably get away with somewhere in the ballpark of less than $2,000 if you kept an eye on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and things like that and buy used boxes, used tools. We didn't want to do that. We're using these tools often enough. We wanted to go new. Plus, the other downside to buying used is that sometimes you might buy a socket set that's supposed to be a 24-piece socket set, but maybe it has 22 sockets because the other two, they ran off somewhere. So do your homework, take a look at the stuff. If you want to go yard sale shopping, go do it. You can make some insane deals happen. So if you like that, if you like saving cash, go do it. Just set a little bit of a, I'm looking for these tools or these sizes anytime you're shopping for that kind of stuff. That way you don't accidentally end up getting something that doesn't suit your needs. But buying new, you don't have to spend a ton of money. This is actually relatively inexpensive for what we need it to be. And again, including the box, you don't have to go crazy. We did go a little bit bigger than we probably needed, but how much work do you need to do? So take a look at what you're planning to do with your car, what you're planning to utilize in your own space, and go from there. If you have questions about it, looking at what tools you might want to do, or you say, I'm considering doing this with my car in the future, what tools do I need? Feel free to call us, send us an email. We'd be happy to talk to you about what we like to use. We're always happy to help out and give you some insight if you're looking for that kind of help. I will stop there and say, do we need to answer any more questions about the tools, or are we okay on that front? Looks like we're okay. I've covered most of them. Okay. Also, I will say that if this is something that you like or have more questions about and you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, please leave us comments and questions below. We will try to answer all of those as they come through, even if you're not here with us live. But we wanted to give you a look at what we use most of the time when we're working on cars here, whether it be personal Miatas or shop cars. We oftentimes use this box for the vast majority of the work that we're doing. So hopefully this was insightful or at least entertaining, if nothing else. We really appreciate your time. These kinds of videos are usually suggestions from our viewers. So if you like this kind of stuff, please give us a like, hit the subscribe button. That way you can see more of videos like this. If you have more ideas for different kinds of videos, maybe you want to see other stuff about, who knows, what other, cars we have, what other projects we have going around in the background, what other shop things we use here on the cars that we're working on, let us know. We're happy to take a look, and if it's something that we think that you'd like to see, maybe we'll do another video about it next time. But of course, as always, thank you again so much for watching. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions about any of this, or of course, Miatas in general, give us a call, send us an email. You can reach out to us via Facebook, Instagram, all of those kinds of things. We're happy to talk, and we'd love to help you out. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time.